Hi everybody, I'm Todd Banner. Welcome to my channel. I know in my previous video I said that the next one was going to be about the photojournalism that I have been doing. However, that's probably going to be put on the back burner until after we move. So folks who are subscribed to this channel know that we are selling our house. We have sold our house. I might have mentioned that, but we've now closed on the sale of our house, and we will be closing on a new condo in less than 2 weeks, and then moving the day after that. So as you might imagine, things are quite hectic. I thought I'd do a video on how to get better than, let's say, average photos of a graduation ceremony. And the reason this came to mind is that Beth's, my niece, on her side of the family, graduated from high school Saturday night. And as many of the western suburban high schools do, her graduation ceremony was out at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb at the Convocation Center, which is a much nicer basketball arena than the one that they had when I went to school there. So we made the hike, the 62-mile hike out there from just west of Chicago. That's conveniently 100 kilometers. So either way, it's about an hour west of us, a little bit more than that, with no traffic. But what it came to mind, as far as using a point and shoot, was because the Convocation Center at NIU does not allow camera bags or purses into their facility. In fact, nothing larger than, I think it was about 5 inches by 3 inches by 2 inches. So you either have to bring just your phone or bring a point and shoot, like the ZS-100, also known as the TZ-100. And really, because of the distances, even these phones that have a fair amount of optical zoom, they're really probably not going to give you the results that a camera that can zoom to 250 millimeters equivalent, such as the ZS-100. But there's a real important thing to keep in mind to get, good photos of the event, and that is, don't just leave your point and shoot in point and shoot mode. Now I know point and shoots vary from completely automatic, but most of them, even if they're completely automatic, have some sort of exposure compensation or some sort of exposure lock feature. Now luckily, the ZS-100 does have exposure compensation. Now it's not as convenient as the LX-100, because the LX-100 actually has a dedicated exposure compensation dial. And what do I mean by exposure compensation? Well, that is, say you have the camera set to automatic, but you want it to underexpose by about a stop of light. You use the exposure compensation button for that. So you can just dial it to -1. Pretty simple on the LX-100, a little bit more complicated on the ZS-TZ cameras. You do use the top shoulder dial, but you have to press up on the four-way controller, and then you get the exposure scale, and then you can adjust this to plus or minus the exposure compensation you want to use. Now, why is that important? Because let's take a look at this picture that I shot during the graduation ceremony, and this was the view right in front of us at all of the graduates. Our niece is in there. Not going to tell you who she is, but look at all those black gowns. And when I graduated high school from Lane Tech, they were green, but they were dark green. The color actually was myrtle, which leads to the fight songs line in Lane Tech's fight song, "Be fearless and bold for the myrtle and the gold." But I digress. So what happens if you just point your camera directly at that scene? Well, your camera's meter, which is designed to kind of assume that the average scene is reflecting 18% of the light. So that sea of black gowns, that's not reflecting 18% of the light. That is absorbing most of the light. So whether it might be reflecting maybe 5% of the light. So if you take a picture of that without doing anything at all, it's going to want to make that black look like it's gray, because it's called 18% gray. That's an average exposure. So what I did was I set the camera to just regular program exposure like any point and shoot has, but then I also set the exposure compensation to minus 1 1/3 stops. So what did that give me as an exposure? For the scene in the picture, it was f5.9, which is wide open at 250 millimeter equivalent, 1/125th of a second at ISO 1600. So really not a hugely high ISO, and actually the ZS100 can do exposures at 1600 ISO and give you decent enough photos to make at least an 8x10 out of. Now this crop that I show here is cropped to 12 megapixels out of the 20, mainly because there was a guy sitting in front of me and the back of his head is in the lower part of the frame, and I didn't think you guys wanted to see that. So if your camera does not have any kind of exposure compensation, it may have exposure lock. So what you could do to get it to underexpose is, well, if you're in an arena, where are the bright lights? The bright lights are up there, right? So if you tilt the camera up, so if you do that and you hit exposure lock, you know, the camera's seeing all those bright lights and it's closing down the lens or shortening the shutter speed to give you a darker exposure. When you bring it down and point it at your graduates, that exposure may be right on. And it may be that you don't have to have the exposure exactly right on to get a decent picture. You can always adjust it after the fact. Even with a JPEG, you're probably going to be close enough to where you can adjust it somewhat on your computer. And by the way, I put the photos from this graduation into Dropbox and sent the link to my sister-in-law, and she was ecstatic about them. So if she wants to print them at about 8x10, they're actually going to look pretty good. Anyway, that's it for today. If this was helpful to you, interesting, hit the like button. It's a really big help to me. If you have any additional comments you'd like to make or questions you have, leave them in the comments field. I answer comments as soon as I can. I'm Todd Banner. I will see you next time.